everyone, Jonathan here. A little bit of something different this evening. I've just come back in from watching the new movie 28 Years Later at the cinema. And I thought, considering it's something that I've been really looking forward to and something that's fresh in my mind, I may have a crack at doing a quick review of the film. But also, towards the end of the review, going into a bit more detail and discussing spoilers and my thoughts. So I would advise anybody that is watching this video, please do, as I've mentioned, expect me to go into detail. I'll be talking around the plot, the movie, the ending, and what my suspicions are from what happens in this film, and potentially may go on to continue in the following sequel, if not sequels, if it gets the go-ahead for the trilogy. So, as I say, 28 Years Later finally has been released. It's something that I've been looking forward to and wanting to see for a very, very long time. The original movie that got released in the early 2000s, starring Cillian Murphy, was one of my favourite zombie genre movies of the time. I found it really interesting because when I first watched 28 Weeks Later, I'd never heard of The Walking Dead. The comics, the TV show hadn't even come out at that time. So I remember when I watched 28 Days Later, really enjoyed it. And then I remember when I watched the first feature-length pilot of The Walking Dead, was quite taken aback with the similarities, especially during the opening scenes with how Cillian's character wakes up in hospital, mirroring how that is what happens in The Walking Dead with Rick. The sequel that came out a number of years later really steps up the story, and the amount of gore and violence contained within that. Robert Carlyle's character in it is amazing. It's sad what happens to him, but crazy at the same time. And I remember the opening 5-10 minutes of 28 Weeks Later being some of the most intense from a British horror movie that I've seen in a number of years, if not some of the most intense that I've seen, full stop, in that for that case. But anyway, here we are. We're at the point now, 28 years later, it's finally come out. And this time around, we've got Aaron Taylor Johnson. Let me just check I've said that right. It's alright, because I don't remember the full cast names properly. I've just had to get the names up in front of me. So yeah, we've got Aaron Taylor Johnson as Jamie. We've got Jodie Comer as Isla. We've got Alfie Williams as Spike. And we've also got Ralph Fiennes, who I will cover the character of in more detail and some of the spoilers. So, I'll just touch on how the movie starts and the basic premise of it. And basically what's happened is the movie opens up similar to how the second one did, where it's a scene set during the outbreak specifically. And you've got a bunch of children that are surrounded, or should I say sat around in a living room, watching the television, watching Teletubbies, in fact. And they're being told by their parents, or a parent of one of them, that they've got to stay in the room and keep quiet. It's from here where one of the children hears strange noises outside, then it goes quiet, and then it just goes nuts. Similar to the start of 28 Weeks Later, where it looks like everything's fine, and then the intensity goes through the roof. You've then got your obvious people being infected, people being attacked, people being murdered, people running, screaming, and it just goes nuts. And it's following on from this scene where you see a kid running to a church. It jumps forward 28 years later. 28 years later, the UK has been put on a quarantine. It is actually being surrounded by naval frigates from other countries, France, Sweden, possibly America as an example. And the reason for that is to stop any survivors or the infection leaving the UK and spreading to the rest of the world. From here we come across a small island that is just off the coast of the UK, where a number of survivors have set up a small but thriving community. And the way in which he managed to do this is because of where the island is based. There's a path that you can walk all the way out of to get to the island, to the mainland, and vice versa. But you can only do it through so many hours of the day, from when the tide drops to when it rises. So it's its own separate community where they live, survive, and a number of them will go to the mainland to hunt and forage for supplies. This is where the movie kicks in, where we've got Jamie and his son Spike. Spike has just turned 12 years of age. It's his birthday, either on this day or close to, and his dad has decided that he wants to take his son to the mainland to train him in the ways of the infected, how to be able to fight and defend for himself, and basically what he needs to do to survive when he's a grown man and he's in that situation where he's got to go to the mainland on his own. This also introduces you to the character of Isla, who's played by Jodie Comer, who is the wife of Jabal. Partner, it doesn't specifically state if it's the wife of Jamie, but mother to Spike. She is bedridden and unfortunately is unwell, and she is losing concentration and forgetting things. Like 1 minute she doesn't know where she is, what year it is, etc. So she's not well at all. This is all within the first 20 minutes or so, so as I say, I'm not going into heavy in-depth with spoilers as such. So Jamie and Spike go to the mainland to teach his son the ways of how to survive, who the infected are, how to avoid them, and following on from this, Spike then decides that he wants to go to the mainland when he finds out, go to the mainland separate to Jamie, because he finds out that there may be somebody there that knows what is wrong with his mother, with a view to treat her. I'm stopping right there. I'm not going to talk anything more about spoilers for the movie until in a few minutes. The movie itself is a 15 rating, which I did find quite surprising due to the amount of swearing included, and also the amount of nudity with regards to the infected. Remember, this is 28 years after the first outbreak, so a number of the infected now are really feral in their appearance, and I don't remember seeing a single one of them that is dressed or has any clothing on at all. This leads to them being, it leads you to see a lot of genitalia, as I mentioned, which for a 15 rated movie I was really surprised by. There's also quite a lot of swearing in the movie, as I mentioned, from Jamie and from Isla, and also some of the other accompanying cast within the film. With regards to special effects, there is minimal CG, which is good. A lot of that is mainly done for wildlife fleeing from certain areas because of the infection. This isn't something that could have been done using real animals, purely because of the sheer volume that you see. Herds of deer, bats, birds, etc. Only rats. And just general wildlife. Gore and violence. The movie is not as violent as 28 Weeks Later. Potentially is on par with the original, if not a little bit more graphic in some. The way it seems to have gotten around a lot of the violence within this movie is through the use of night vision cameras. Interestingly enough, the second movie did use night vision cameras, or should I say infrared or green night vision, towards the later end of the movie through the use of a tactical scope. And that was one of the movie's more suspenseful and horrific scenes, specifically with regards to what happens to one of the main characters in that second film. I believe they probably thought that worked quite well, which it did, and they've used that as a way of showing the infected within this movie in a number of scenes. The use of infrared and night vision camera work does work in its favour because it's allowing them to show quite a lot of gore, but also being able to hide a lot of the special effects or lack of that they may have used for these. You get the idea of what's happening, but because it's dark and it's infrared, you can't fully see what is going on, but you know what is happening. As I say, that's quite good because it leaves a lot of it to your imagination, but it's also quite good how the infrared shines off the infected eyes, because it does make them look more feral, more animal-like, and almost like if you were filming wildlife at night and we're looking at a fox's eyes, how they are illuminated on the cameras, or even if you take a photo of your dogs and how they've got the red eyes that are on show. This is where, as I say, I'm avoiding spoilers at the moment, but I'll just talk briefly about my thoughts. The first half of the movie I thought was really good, and it sets the pace and tone of what you'd expect from a movie in the 28 years, months, weeks series. Second half of the movie does feel to go slightly off the rails and lose track. That happens even more so towards the end of the film. I don't know if that's because they're setting this up purely as the first of a trilogy and they're going to expand more upon the story in the second movie, and if that's successful, to carry on with the third and final part that they've discussed, or if it's something that they're doing to try and introduce new people to the films. Bearing in mind 28 weeks and 28 months are now a number of years old. Maybe before 2010 for both of those films. I'm not too sure off the top of my head. I think one was 2002 or 2004, and the other one may have been 2006, 2008. There was definitely a few years gap between the first and the second, and I'm pretty sure they were before 2010 for both. So you're talking movies that are well over 15 years at the moment, at least. So I think the idea is that they wanted to bring this back for fans of the original movies, but then how they've set this up, it could be a new introduction for people that have never seen them before and are welcome to the idea of this new trilogy which they're wanting to make. Overall, with regards to the film, I did enjoy it. I would say honestly, I did prefer 28 Weeks Later, just because of how over the top it made the whole infection, and the sheer amount of infected and the amount of violence and death that you come accustomed to seeing in zombie disease style movies such as these. The first was very suspenseful, the second was very action horror orientated. This one kind of sits between the first, if not on par, or tries to have that fine line between the first and the second, where it's story, suspense, and also horror. Out of 10, I would give the movie maybe a 7.5 and an 8 out of 10. That's not to say that it's a bad movie, it's not far from it, it was quite enjoyable. But I'm basing that score on if I'm giving the original movies both a 9 out of 10. I don't feel it's as good as either, just from literally coming from the cinema and watching it. It's not bad, I would recommend that people go to see it, but for how they are setting it up, it does not have that 28 days, weeks feel to it. It does in parts, but not all the way through the film, and towards the second and third acts, it definitely does not feel that way. But definitely something I would recommend to watch if you enjoy the movies and if you like these types of films. So now, I'm going to go a bit more in depth, and I am just sorting out my camera, and we're going to be talking spoilers. So I touched on the opening of the movie, where it introduces modern day. The infection has just broken out, and obviously people are fearful, they're hiding away, and as I mentioned, you've got a number of children that are watching the Teletubbies. It's from here that you see a number of the characters in this pre-28 days, 28 weeks scenario die. But you do see one child that gets away and, as I mentioned, fights within a church. And that's when the movie jumps forward 28 years. He even comes up 28 years later in the form of the movie. Never explains who this child is till this point, so you're guessing throughout. You're then introduced to the characters of Jamie and Spike, as I mentioned, on the island just off the coast of the UK, where they're segregated and they've got the path that is safe to cross at certain times of the day, which keeps them isolated from the infected. It's from here that you get the feeling, or guess, or I personally did, that the character of Jamie is the child that you see in the flashback at the start of the movie. From here, as mentioned, he takes his son out to train him up, to get him used to the idea of going to the mainland. And it's part way through here where they see a number of infected. His son does kill two through doing the tuition and encouragement from his father. And then they run into a field with one lone infected standing at the top. Jamie turns around and says to Spike, stand still, and mentions that this is what he would call an alpha. So the alphas are mutated versions of the infected that walk more human-like compared to the others, where they twitch and move more zombie-like. But also it seems that they have the ability to communicate and almost order other infected around. From the scene, as mentioned, where they spot this alpha and then a number of other infected begin to appear. When the alpha roars, that sets off all the others to charge and try to kill Jamie and Spike. Fortunately, they manage to evade this and they get back to the main island, their segregated island, and they have a party to celebrate Spike's christening, crossing to the mainland as such. And this is where Spike gets talking to a friend of the family and mentions that whilst he was on the mainland with his dad, they could see a fire that was burning in the distance, a very large fire, in fact. Jamie disagrees. Talking to mentions that this is where a doctor lives, a doctor by the name of Elson that is played by Val Fiennes. Because Isla, Spike's mother, is unwell and they don't have access to medical supplies or a GP or a doctor of their own, he decides to take it upon himself to take his mother, or should I say stage an incident within their community, and whilst he takes his mother to the mainland with a doctor to see if it's possible to treat her. This is all stuff that you'll have read on the internet with at this point, I imagine, and I had an idea of this, going in to the movie to begin with. Partway through this, you are introduced to a small military team that are on the run from the infected. You witness them getting basically obliterated. They come across a large infected alpha who basically kills the remaining members of the squad apart from one, who is a Swedish naval officer by the name of Eric. Moving then switches back to Spike and Isla, and they are on the run from infected and taking refuge in an abandoned petrol station. So at this point where the petrol station gets swamped, it looks like it's game over for them, and then Eric actually appears within the petrol station and manages to save the two of them. It's from here that Eric, Isla and Spike begin their own journey separately. Eric explains that the reason that him and his squad are on the island is because they were on a boat that hit a rock out at sea and sank. And when they were on their lifeboat, unfortunately it washed onto the mainland, and he's got no way of communicating or getting off. This is where things start to get a bit peculiar. You see throughout the movie from this point, the infected in their own separate scenes. They are just naked, feral beings pondering around lakes and forests, and you notice one of them is actually a woman that is pregnant. Jump forward a few scenes and the three people that I've mentioned come across a abandoned train, and she can hear this infected female screaming very, very loud. They then go inside this train, and Isla finds the infected female actually giving birth, and she manages to calm the infected female down enough where she can support her through the pregnancy. The baby is then born and appears to be not infected at all, and appears to be a normal human baby. Eric can't believe what he is seeing. Once the baby's been born, the pregnant mother, now after giving birth, goes feral, and Eric kills her. He then threatens Isla and Spike if they don't put the child down, that he will kill them and the child. And this is when a alpha male infected comes in and quickly kills Eric and pursues Isla and Spike in what can only be explained as he's seen his partner been killed and he is now chasing after them to get his child back. As I say, this is very, very different to the previous two movies, and it's suggested and showing that evolution in the infected and their attitudes and behaviours. This huge infected takes multiple arrows to the chest. It doesn't seem to affect him whatsoever. He's quite bulky, large in appearance, very, very strong, seems to have a very high pain threshold. It's from there when it looks like it's the last minute again for Spike and Isla, when the infected alpha gets a blow dart that is blown into his chest and literally just becomes motionless. We are then introduced to Dr. Ian Kelson, played by Ralph Fiennes, and he explains to the two of them that he has certain medical ingredients that he's concocted that act as tranquilizers for the infected, to the point where he even knows this infected that has been chasing them, and he's given it a name, the name of Samson. He then explains to them that they need to get away from there as quickly as possible, and he takes them to the fire which he has been based at. He's been based at for a number of years by the sounds of it. When they get there, it's basically a human memorial. There's loads of pillars that are made of human bones, and in the middle of all of these there is a huge pillar made of human skulls. And it turns out that what Ralph Fiennes' character, or Dr. Kelson, has been doing is collecting dead bodies. He's been burning them. He has then been stripping all of the skin, the brain, the eyes, everything, and he's just been basically just burning everything down to the human skull, and he's been creating this pillar. This then makes you think that this guy's completely crazy. He speaks to Spike over why he does this, and it's a way of paying tribute to those that have passed away, and this memorial that he's built is to remember death and almost in a sense to celebrate it. During this scene, he has collected the spinal column and head of the Swedish Army naval soldier Eric, and you are shown the process which he goes through, where he strips all of the skin, muscle, everything, basically melts it down to the skull, and fights to put it on this memorial that he's built. Jumping forward from here, we then see Dr. Kelson investigate Isla, and he diagnoses that she has cancer, and unfortunately, due to lack of medical supplies, treatment and proper equipment, and how badly it looks like it's spread, he can't treat it. It's from here that he mentions to Spike and to Isla that unfortunately there's nothing that he can do and she doesn't have much time left to live. There's a mutual nod of agreement between Dr. Kelson and Isla, where they agree that they will use one of the blow darts to put a weakened version on Spike so he can't follow them. And Spike is left with the baby from the infected female, whilst Isla and Dr. Kelson walk away with a view where Dr. Kelson is going to give Isla a peaceful death. Later on from this, Dr. Kelson returns with a melted down remains in a human skull and tells Spike that this is what is remaining of his mother, and he wants him to put her skull where he feels best this would be, on the memorial skull statue that he's built. This is very peculiar, and as I say, this does not feel like a 28 days movie or 28 weeks. He then, or should I say, the two of them with the infected baby are then intercepted by Samson again, who looks like he is purely after them now to get back the infected child. They manage to evade Samson one last time, and Dr. Kelson then tells Spike that he needs to take the baby back to where he came from and look after the child there. The movie then jumps forward to where Spike has gone back to his community, but rather than returning, he has left the baby outside. He has also left a note for his father, explaining that he does not want to return as of yet. He will return when he feels ready, and he's going to live on the mainland to become accustomed to what he needs to be to become a man, and one day he will be back, and that the baby he's left is from an infected female, but she is not infected, and he's named the child Isla after his deceased mother and wants his dad to raise it. His dad then runs out of the gates trying to scream his son's name, but unfortunately, because the tide is in, can't get to the mainland to find him, or even attempt to find him. It then jumps forward 28 days later, again with the useful font nod in the corner, and we see Spike. He's now able to catch fish using his bow and arrow. He's becoming a lot more accustomed as a hunter, surviving on the mainland on his own, and we see him facing off against one infected, thinking it will be okay, only then to have a number of them that come and swarm him at once. When he comes across a dead end, he then meets a person at the top of the wall who just looks ridiculous. He is dressed as and has white hair, and all I can say is looks like he is impersonating or is dressed as Jimmy Savile, which just does not sound right and just sends this movie in a completely bonkers direction. The guy even says his name's Jimmy, which just, are you saying this because you're Jimmy Savile? You want to be Jimmy Savile? You're dressed as him? What's this about? And then he's got a row of people that line up by the side of him, all with weapons, dressed exactly the same. Silly coloured blonde hair, with weapons, in tracksuits, gold chains, etc. It's weird. Spike then asks these individuals for help. They jump down into what is just a parkour, martial infused fight scene against the infected. They're teasing them, tormenting them, but they are killing them at the same time. And it seems that this group of individuals know how to look after themselves, but live very dangerously, recklessly, and treat it as it is fun. Once they've got rid of the infected, that is when Jimmy walks over and introduces himself to Spike, and you see that he is wearing the same type of, if not the same crucifix that you see the child at the beginning of the movie holding in his hand whilst he is hiding in a church. The child is mentioned that you see in the opening scenes is running away whilst his mum's being murdered or infected, all of his friends are being infected, and he runs into this church and he meets his father, who is a priest. His father, who's the priest, has lost his mind, says that this is what the world deserves and needs, and this is redemption for everybody, and this is the next coming. he gives his son this crucifix and tells his son to go. His father is then bombarded and infected, and as I say, the young son that we find out is named Jimmy is left hiding, holding this crucifix, praying to God, and that's when it jumps forward. And it's at the end of the movie we realise that Jimmy isn't Jamie, as thought. It's actually, as he calls himself, Sir Jimmy Crystal. So, as mentioned, it starts like a 28 weeks, 28 days movie. Then towards the second half of the movie, and especially the third act, apart from that final scene, you do not see much of the infected at all. It is more around Ian Kelson with this bone temple. Though it's not called a bone temple in the movie, which is interesting, and that's the name of the second film. The bizarre ritual that he has, where he's basically just burning and melting everybody so only the skull remains. The infected female giving birth to a non-infected child, and ultimately the group of Jimmy Savile lookalikes at the end. It's bonkers, is all I can say. It's bonkers. Interestingly enough, in the movie, with regards to Spike's mum, Isla, played by Jodie Comer, as I say, because the cancer has either gone from her body to a brain or a brain to a body, she has moments where she can't remember who she is, personality is erratic, she's regressing to earlier periods of her life. And there's one particular scene part way through the movie where she is confusing her own son with her dad, and an infected appears behind them. And Spike tells his mum to stay still, he pulls out the bow and arrow and he kills this infected. And this is when you see blood spray from the infected and land on his mother's head. And he quickly runs up to her with a cloth and grabs hold of the cloth and rubs it away, and he says, you're fine, it's not got in your eyes, you're fine. His mum then has a flashback where she's remembering when she was in this area as a child, maybe 7 or 8 years of age. She was there with her dad. And you see her, and you see who would be her father behind, but you don't see the face or headshot. It's just literally the torso and the arms. Again, when the infected female is giving birth, Isla is physically holding the infected arms to try and calm her down, and even delivering the baby, and asks her son to cut the umbilical cord. All the way through this, and in the original movies, there was always the thing with regards to the blood and how the blood from the infected passes on the disease. Now, I remember in the first movie, there was an instance where one of the characters looks up and a drop of blood goes directly into his eye, and that's what leads to the infection. The other scenes, I can't remember if it is that it's got to be that it gets in your mouth, or it gets into your eyes, or it just gets into contact with you. But I would have thought that, if something, especially the amount of blood Isla herself from delivering a baby and having it on her that her son just literally wipes away, I would have thought there would have been something here that would suggest that she could have turned quite easily, but throughout the movie hasn't. And I don't get that. It's like it's setting something more up for her character. Or maybe even Spike, because Spike's her son, potentially. And there's also a scene where Dr. Kelson is investigating Isla, and he's asking to check her body, her lymph nodes, even her breast, her arms, etc., to try and diagnose, and that's where he comes across the idea of cancer. There's one scene where Kelson turns around and says to Isla, I asked you to remember a word, and you remember what that word is. And Isla at this point is quite compos mentis. She knows where she is and she's living in the moment. And she looks at the doctor very, very confused. And she goes, I don't remember the word. But you've never seen a scene where he's mentioned this either. And he turns around and he says, the word I asked you to remember is Isla, or Isla, which is her name. Which looked to me almost as if Kelson knows her from previous and maybe even gave her that name. And it's strange because when you see him walk away with her as well, you never actually see her die. You see him walking away with her while Spike is unable to follow and holding the infected baby due to him being drugged. But then hours later he returns with a skull and says that this is your mum. So you never actually see her die, but you get the idea that she has. So this is where I'm going to go into some crazy ideas and thoughts that I have for this movie. I personally believe, and I could be massively mistaken by this point, and it is just guesswork, is that the character played by Jodie Comer is the grown-up surviving daughter from 28 weeks later that makes it to France that you see at the end of that film. I also think this because you see in the part, as I mentioned, where she's remembering her father, and you even see her father's hands behind and the torso, they mentioned that he was 7 or 8 at the time. So I'd imagine this would be when the world is not infected, and it would have been prior to the infection. I'm guessing the reason you don't see the dad, or the dad's face, is because it's Robert Carlyle's character from the second movie. And if you saw it as Robert Carlyle, you would know straight away from watching the second film that that's the daughter that survives the second movie, and she's immune to the disease, the same as her brother is at the end of the second film. So I think, as I say, she's the girl from the second movie who gets to France. Something happens to her and her brother during that part between 28 weeks and 28 years, where they have been taken away and they've been experimented on. And I believe Dr. Kelson is one of said doctors that has been working on her or experimenting on her. Now, whether that be that it was a UK underground facility where they were conducting experiments and maybe it was overrun and Dr. Kelson managed to get her out of there and has given her this fake identity or has told her what her name is and she's gone to live a life in this community, I'm guessing at that. And because the underground facility or lab or whatever that maybe he's been working and has now been overrun and it's no good, there's nothing he can do. Or maybe the facility does still exist and the character that he plays is to scare anyone else away from him. Interesting enough, when they meet Dr. Kelson for the first time, he looks like he's covered in infected blood, but he's not. And he mentions to both of them, he says that he is covered head to toe in iodine, and that iodine helps to fight the infection. Now, that was never mentioned in the first movie because that's when the infection was literally just wiping out the United Kingdom, and it was never mentioned in the second movie where the American military have actually come in and have begun to clean up the country and are reintroducing people into small, contained towns and cities. If they knew that iodine could fight the infection, that is something that would have surely been used and mentioned in the second movie, which makes me think that Kelson has been somewhere else working with other individuals, trying to find a cure or trying to monitor what's going on with this disease, and again makes me think that he has been able to survive knowing what they discovered, or potentially they are still working on this and they use his character as a person to scare away anything that might be going on. So yeah, that's my thoughts. I've just realised I've been going on for 40 minutes nearly talking about this, which I apologise for. I did not think it was going to be anywhere near this length of time. As I say, it's an interesting movie. It does not feel like a 28 days or 28 weeks. It reminded me more so of, let me just find the name of the movie, another UK film, Doomsday, that came out in 2008 and starred Rona Mitra and Bob Hoskins. And that's interesting because that movie was about a outbreak that was infecting the United Kingdom, and they sent Rona Mitra to Scotland to find a cure. If memory serves right, this movie's set in Scotland, or at least part off towards that way. I could be wrong actually, it could be the bottom of the UK, but I did have the idea of Scotland. Yeah, it's Scotland, yeah. Because when the Swedish army actually crash onto the rocks and lose their boat, he jokes saying Scotch on the rocks. So yeah, this feels like it could have been a prequel slash sequel to Doomsday more than it would have been a continuation of the 28 Days Weeks saga. It is worth watching. How it ends is absolutely bonkers and very off-putting, especially, as I say, with the introduction of Sir Jimmy Crystal. It's just in bad taste. The way how the first two movies are quite serious, the way in which this movie is quite serious to a degree and up until a point, but then by introducing these characters at the end, it just looks stupid. In the original movie, when you got Christopher Eccleston with the small military unit that he was based with, they had started to exhibit strange, peculiar, if not maddening behaviour on how they were torturing the infected, how they were experimenting on them, how they just treated each other and also any survivors that they met. But that was military going nuts in a situation that they could not win, and that would send anybody crazy and make them more violent or aggressive. These guys are just nuts and they just look stupid. I hope they aren't in the second movie for long. I hope they quickly wrap up the idea of that, and I hope the idea of bringing Cillian Murphy back in for the second one also makes it more enjoyable. But as I say, I think the ending ruins the movie, and there's too many questions. It's setting itself up, but it's poorly executing the questions and the viability of the movie towards the end. As I say, it's enjoyable. It just does not feel like a continuation of the 28 saga. It feels like it should be Doomsday prequel, Doomsday sequel, or it should not even have anything to do with either of those, and it's just its own new self-contained trilogy about an infection that spreads throughout the UK. There's lots of movies that have done this since 28 Weeks Later, and there'll be a lot more, and this could quite easily have been a new separate thing. I think if the original 28 months would have come out that they wanted to do a number of years ago, that would have been completely different to this. But I think they've left the movie too long, and I think they're going down a new avenue as a way of bringing in new audiences, but still trying to appeal to those that liked and wanted a third one from 28 days, 28 weeks. It's watchable, but the more I'm talking about it, it does not feel like the movie that I was expecting or wanting to see. Enjoyable, but this is not 28 days, 28 weeks. Apart from name and the initial idea. Tell me if I'm wrong in the comments. If you would disagree with me, I'm more than happy. Share your views, your comments. If it be that you disagree with what I've mentioned over my ideas of Jodie Comer's character, with regards to Spike, with Isla, with Dr. Kelson, if you've got your own suggestions of what might happen and how they're going to reintroduce Cillian Murphy. Before I wrap it up, I do think they're going to reintroduce Cillian Murphy and have him based on one of these naval frigates that are out at sea. At the end of the first movie, you do see them flagging down the plane, or at least asking for help, and by that stage they might have picked them up and flown them out of the area. And then when it jumps forward 28 weeks later, that's when the full quarantine happened around the UK, because the Americans couldn't contain it and they couldn't stop it. But yeah, that's enough from me. I'm just going to have some bits and pieces running in the background, but thanks for watching and catch you all later.